In
Oh
the
my.
candlelit
What has
ballrooms of
happened?
Renaissance Europe, where diplomacy danced with danger
Gods!
and every
Gods!
toast could be a trap, a deadly secret glinted on noble fingers. Ornate rings, crafted by master goldsmiths, hid more than jewels. Beneath their polished surfaces lay hollow chambers filled with poison. With a subtle twist, a drop could be released into a goblet, a handshake, or a wound. No daggers, no drama, just death, delivered with elegance. These rings were the tools of spies, assassins, and betrayed lovers. But who wore them? And how many deaths were mistaken for fate, when in truth, they were sealed with a twist of the finger? Let's uncover the hidden world of Renaissance poison rings, where beauty masked murder. The Renaissance, often remembered for its soaring cathedrals, humanist philosophy, and dazzling works of art, was also an age of shadows, a period where beauty and treachery often shared the same frame. In the courts of Italy, France, and the Iberian kingdoms, power was delicate, fragile, and constantly under threat. A patron's favor could rise or vanish with the stroke of a quill. A noble's survival could depend on the loyalty of a single ally or the silence of a single enemy. In such an atmosphere, weapons were rarely drawn in public. Instead, the deadliest tools were those that could be hidden in plain sight. The poison ring was not born in isolation. Its ancestry could be traced back to antiquity. Ancient Roman and Byzantine jewelers had experimented with hollowed compartments in rings, sometimes for perfumes or relics, but occasionally for more sinister uses. There are accounts, some credible, others more legend than fact, of senators and courtiers carrying toxins in rings as a form of insurance, a last resort to avoid capture or disgrace. In the medieval world, this practice persisted in whispers. Crusaders returning from the East brought with them examples of intricate Islamic and Persian metalwork, including rings with tiny hinged bezels or compartments, marvels of engineering that European goldsmiths studied and adapted. It was in 15th century Italy, however, that the poison ring began to take its iconic form. The Italian Renaissance was a paradox, a flowering of science, art, and philosophy existing alongside cutthroat political rivalries. City-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan were governed not only by laws but by webs of intrigue. The Medici, the Sforza, the Borgias, their names became synonymous with patronage of genius, yet also with the ruthless elimination of threats. Public executions were dramatic but messy. Assassination, done quietly, was often the preferred method when one needed a problem to vanish without stirring rebellion. Goldsmiths in cities like Florence and Milan rose to meet this demand. Their craft had always been one of prestige, producing rings adorned with gemstones to be worn as markers of wealth. But the Renaissance goldsmith was as much an engineer as an artist. Using techniques learned from clockmakers and armorers, they created rings with bezels that could twist or flip open, revealing a tiny cavity within. The hinges were invisible to the casual eye, and the opening mechanism could be disguised within decorative patterns. The cavity was just large enough to hold a few drops of liquid, sometimes a lethal extract of arsenic, cantharidin, or aconite, other times a powdered poison ready to be dusted over food or dissolved into wine. These were not crude tools. A well-made poison ring was a thing of beauty in its own right, often inlaid with enamel, set with a cabochon gem, or engraved with intricate designs. The artistry served two purposes: to flatter the vanity of the wearer and to draw attention away from any suspicion of its true function. A ring worn to a banquet might gleam with polished ruby while hiding the means to make that banquet the last arrival would ever attend. The knowledge of poisons was itself an art, cultivated in parallel. Renaissance apothecaries and alchemists understood how to extract lethal substances from plants like hemlock, foxglove, and monkshood, as well as how to refine mineral poisons like mercury and arsenic into purer, more potent forms. The poisoner's craft demanded precision. Too weak a dose, and the target might recover. Too strong, and the death would be too sudden, raising suspicion. The poison ring was designed to deliver just enough to escape notice until it was too late. The earliest documented uses of such rings are shrouded in secrecy. Historians believe some may have been employed in the complex feuds between noble houses in Florence, or in the silent removal of political dissidents in Venice, whose Council of Ten was infamous for its covert operations. The records, when they exist, are often cloaked in euphemism. He was taken ill after the feast, or she fell into a sudden and grievous sickness. To admit to the use of a poison ring would have been to confess to murder, a confession unlikely to appear in official annals. What can be said with greater certainty is that the poison ring fit perfectly into the Renaissance worldview, where artifice and art, beauty and brutality, could coexist without contradiction. The same court that commissioned Botticelli to paint Venus emerging from the sea could also order a ring to ensure that an inconvenient ambassador never returned home. For the wearer, slipping such a ring onto the finger was to adorn oneself with both elegance and the capacity for silent, irreversible action. The rings were not only for the ambitious or the vengeful. In some cases, they were crafted for self-defense, particularly for those navigating dangerous political landscapes. A diplomat might carry a ring not to kill others, but to kill himself should negotiations collapse and capture seem inevitable. In these cases, the poison ring was a grim kind of insurance policy, the final assertion of control in a world where power was rarely in one's own hands. By the turn of the 16th century, the poison ring had become both tool and symbol. It embodied the Renaissance fascination with hidden knowledge, with the interplay between appearance and reality. A jeweled ornament could also be a death sentence. A gesture of courtly affection could mask the delivery of a fatal dose. Goldsmiths who specialized in such work became trusted confidants of their patrons, bound by both loyalty and the knowledge that betrayal could be met with the very tools they crafted. The art of making and using poison rings would only grow more refined in the decades to come, as the courts of Europe became even more entangled in espionage, diplomacy, and the theater of appearances. And as the Renaissance entered its height, the poison ring would take its place not only on the fingers of assassins, but in the whispered legends of an age that understood that beauty was never truly innocent. In the Renaissance city, the goldsmith shop was more than a place to purchase adornments. It was a crossroads of art, politics, and, in some cases, deadly intrigue. Behind the display of ornate crucifixes, wedding bands, and jeweled brooches, certain artisans cultivated reputations not just for beauty, but for ingenuity, the kind of ingenuity that could hide a lethal mechanism beneath a surface of enamel and gold. These men were the masters of metal and death, craftsmen whose skill was as coveted by assassins and spies as by brides and noblemen. To the uninitiated, the making of a poison ring might seem a simple matter of adding a compartment to an ordinary band. But to a master goldsmith of Florence or Venice, such work was an exercise in engineering precision. The hollow bezel, the part of the ring that concealed the poison, had to be large enough to hold a meaningful dose, yet small enough to pass unnoticed under casual scrutiny. The hinge or swivel mechanism that opened it had to operate smoothly for the wearer, but resist accidental jostling. The interior chamber had to be lined in a way that resisted corrosion from liquids or powders, lest the poison leak or degrade before it could be used. These were problems not every jeweler could solve, and those who could quickly earn discreet, high-paying commissions from clients who valued both the object and the silence that came with it. In many cases, these commissions came through intermediaries, a trusted servant, a messenger from a foreign court, ensuring that the artisan might never know the full identity of the person for whom the ring was intended. Payment was generous, but so was the risk. A craftsman known for making such items could easily become a liability to a patron, and history holds whispers of goldsmiths who vanished without explanation once their services were no longer convenient. The goldsmiths did not work alone. Their craft overlapped with that of the apothecary and the alchemist. Apothecaries supplied the poisons themselves: powdered arsenic, ground glass, extract of aconite, tinctures distilled from belladonna or hemlock. The selection of the poison was as important as the design of the ring. Some substances acted swiftly, others slowly. Some left the body without obvious signs. Others betrayed their presence through discoloration or swelling. The choice depended on the strategy of the assassination. A quick death might serve in moments of open confrontation. A delayed sickness was ideal for killing without drawing suspicion to a specific event. Alchemists, meanwhile, contributed not just in preparing these substances, but in developing materials and coatings to ensure they remained potent within the confines of the ring. They experimented with tiny glass vials or thin layers of wax to separate liquid poison from the metal walls, preventing unwanted reactions. The marriage of goldsmithing and chemical knowledge was critical. Without it, the risk of self-poisoning during storage or delivery was dangerously high. The workshops where these collaborations occurred were both ordinary and extraordinary. In daylight, they rang with the sound of hammers and files, smelled of flux and molten metal. Apprentices polished silver chalices, mended chains, or set gems into bridal tiaras. But in the quieter hours, with shutters closed, the master might lean over a bench to assemble the delicate hinge of a hidden compartment, his fingers blackened from the work, his mind fixed on the deadly precision required. A misplaced pin, a hinge too loose, a bezel that failed to close flush against its setting. These were not mere mistakes, but potential disasters for both maker and wearer. In Venice, where the lines between merchant and spy were often blurred, such craftsmen found steady demand. The Venetian Republic's Council of Ten had long employed assassins for delicate political work, and while their records are deliberately opaque, scattered hints suggest that poison rings were among the tools at their disposal. In Florence, under the Medici, the patronage of artists extended to those whose art served more discreet purposes. A favored goldsmith might craft both a baptismal gift for a godchild and a ring designed to ensure that a rival never left a banquet alive. These artisans understood that their work required more than technical skill. It required absolute discretion. Some maintained elaborate front shops, their displays designed to project an image of piety and respectability. Others kept their dealings private, relying on a small circle of patrons who paid handsomely for loyalty. Silence was the currency that kept them alive, and a breach could mean ruin. In rare cases, a goldsmith might be forced to wear his own creation, not as a mark of pride, but as a death sentence delivered by the very patron he had served. The designs themselves varied according to need and taste. Some poison rings were ostentatious, set with large gems whose settings concealed the hinge or swivel. Others were plain, almost monastic in appearance, so as not to draw the eye. In Italy, enameling was a common decorative technique, the vivid colors serving to disguise the fine seam where the compartment opened. In France, jewelers often favored intricate engravings, which could hide the tiny catch of the mechanism within their patterns. The deadliest rings were often the least remarkable, plain bands that could pass unnoticed in any setting, yet carried within them the power to alter the course of a dynasty. Though their work was dangerous, some goldsmiths took pride in the intellectual challenge of the poison ring. In the Renaissance, mastery of craft was celebrated, whether in painting, sculpture, or metalwork. To design a mechanism that could hold, conceal, and deliver a lethal dose with flawless precision was, to these men, an achievement on par with any public commission. It was an art that demanded the same balance of form and function as a cathedral dome or a clockwork automaton. But if the making of a poison ring was an art, it was also a gamble. The craftsman's skill could protect him only so far. The true danger lay not in the making, but in the knowledge that, once possessed, could make him a target for anyone seeking to control or erase the secrets he held. In this sense, the goldsmith shared the same precarious fate as the spies and assassins who wore his creations. As the 16th century progressed, the poison ring became more sophisticated, its mechanisms more subtle, its uses more varied. And in the courts where appearances were everything, the goldsmith's work became a silent partner in the great game of power. A game in which every smile might hide a threat, every jewel might conceal a blade, and every ring might carry within it the quiet promise of death. The poison ring's beauty was only the surface. Its true power lay in what it concealed. Beneath the gold and enamel, beyond the engineering of the hidden compartment, rested a substance chosen with care, prepared with precision, and intended to end a life without leaving an obvious trace. In the Renaissance, poison was as much an art as the metalwork that held it, and those who mastered it combined knowledge from apothecaries, herbalists, and alchemists into a science of silence. The choice of poison began with the intended outcome. Was the goal a swift and decisive death, or a lingering illness that could be mistaken for natural decline? Did the victim need to die before witnesses, collapsing dramatically in a hall or banquet, or quietly, days after an encounter, allowing the assassin to slip away unnoticed? Each question shaped the assassin's selection, and the poison ring was designed to deliver the chosen dose with speed and subtlety. Among the most feared substances of the period was arsenic. Known since antiquity, arsenic trioxide was a favorite of Renaissance poisoners for its lack of color, taste, and odor when mixed into wine or food. In small doses over time, it could mimic the symptoms of disease, vomiting, fever, wasting, and leave the victim too weak to suspect foul play. In larger doses, it could kill within hours. Apothecaries prepared it by roasting arsenic-bearing ores and refining the vapor into a fine, deadly powder. Stored inside a ring, it could remain potent for months, ready to be tipped into a goblet with the flick of a finger. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was another choice, prized not only for its lethality, but for its deceptive beauty. Its shiny black berries were as toxic as they were enticing, containing alkaloids that could cause hallucinations, paralysis, and death. A few drops of its extract, delivered through a cut on the skin or into a drink, could kill within hours. Its effects, dilated pupils, flushed skin, delirium, might be mistaken for fever, allowing the assassin to vanish before suspicion fell. Aconite, known as monkshood or wolfsbane, was valued for its rapid action when introduced into the bloodstream. A tiny smear of its root paste on a dagger tip or the sharpened edge of a ring's bezel could be enough to fell a victim within minutes, as the alkaloid slowed the heart and disrupted nerve signals. Aconite was dangerous even to handle. Poisoners used gloves and special tools to prepare it, and the artisans who built poison rings often lined the compartments to prevent the substance from seeping into the metal and inadvertently harming the wearer. Cantharidin, distilled from the crushed bodies of blister beetles, occupied a strange place in the poisoner's arsenal. Though it was sometimes used in questionable medicines or aphrodisiacs, in sufficient doses it caused severe inflammation of the stomach and urinary tract, leading to agony and often death. Its crystalline form made it easy to hide in powder mixtures, though it was less common than plant or mineral toxins because of its distinctive burning effect on the victim's mouth and throat. Mineral poisons like mercury and lead were also known, though their use in rings was less frequent. Mercury salts could kill, but their metallic taste and strong symptoms often betrayed them. Lead, while toxic over long exposure, was too slow for most assassins' purposes. These substances were more often used in the slow poisoning of rivals over weeks or months, hidden in cosmetics or tableware rather than delivered in a single dose from a ring. The preparation of poisons required a level of secrecy equal to that of the ring's construction. Apothecaries who engaged in such work did so under the guise of preparing medicines. Indeed, many poisons in small doses were used legitimately for treatment. The line between cure and curse was perilously thin, and knowledge of that line was the poisoner's greatest advantage. Recipes were guarded as jealously as a goldsmith's mechanical secrets, often committed only to memory to avoid incriminating evidence. Storage was critical. Liquids were often kept in tiny glass or ceramic vials within the ring's compartment, sealed with wax to prevent leaks. Powders could be wrapped in parchment or linen, sometimes mixed with inert substances to disguise them further. The container's interior was often lined with gold or silver, metals resistant to corrosion, ensuring that the poison retained its potency until the moment of use. Delivery was the final consideration. A poison ring could be used to tip powder into a drink or food, but the most cunning designs allowed for direct application to the skin. Certain poisons, such as aconite, could be absorbed transdermally if rubbed into a fresh cut. An assassin might feign a handshake or a courtly caress, scratching the skin just enough for the toxin to enter the bloodstream. In this way, a murder could be committed in the middle of a crowded reception, the victim's fate sealed with a gesture that appeared affectionate. It was this versatility that made poison rings so feared. They could kill in minutes or in months, in public or in private, and the act could be so subtle that no one, perhaps not even the victim, would know it had happened until it was far too late. The poison was not merely a tool of death. It was an extension of the assassin's will, a way to shape events without drawing a blade or raising a voice. Yet poisons carried risks, even for the skilled. A careless slip could contaminate the assassin's own food or drink. A sudden cough during the act of sprinkling powder could send it into the air, where it might be inhaled. Some substances, like mercury compounds, could be absorbed through the skin, making the simple act of loading the ring a potentially fatal task. For this reason, the most successful poisoners were those who understood not only their tools but their own limits, and who treated the act of preparation with the same reverence as the final strike. In the end, the poisons themselves were as much a part of the Renaissance fascination with hidden knowledge as the rings that carried them. They drew on the era's blend of science and superstition, of herbal lore and emerging chemistry. To master them was to hold in one's hand the power of life and death, a power that could alter the fate of a banquet, a court, a kingdom. And for those who wore the ring, the poison was more than a weapon. It was a promise, silent and absolute, that the glittering jewel on their finger was as dangerous as it was beautiful. The poison ring's beauty was only the surface. Its true power lay in what it concealed. Beneath the gold and enamel, beyond the engineering of the hidden compartment, rested a substance chosen with care, prepared with precision, and intended to end a life without leaving an obvious trace. In the Renaissance, poison was as much an art as the metalwork that held it, and those who mastered it combined knowledge from apothecaries, herbalists, and alchemists into a science of silence. The choice of poison began with the intended outcome. Was the goal a swift and decisive death, or a lingering illness that could be mistaken for natural decline? Did the victim need to die before witnesses, collapsing dramatically in a hall or banquet, or quietly, days after an encounter, allowing the assassin to slip away unnoticed? Each question shaped the assassin's selection, and the poison ring was designed to deliver the chosen dose with speed and subtlety. Among the most feared substances of the period was arsenic. Known since antiquity, arsenic trioxide was a favorite of Renaissance poisoners for its lack of color, taste, and odor when mixed into wine or food. In small doses over time, it could mimic the symptoms of disease, vomiting, fever, wasting, and leave the victim too weak to suspect foul play. In larger doses, it could kill within hours. Apothecaries prepared it by roasting arsenic-bearing ores and refining the vapor into a fine, deadly powder. Stored inside a ring, it could remain potent for months, ready to be tipped into a goblet with the flick of a finger. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was another choice, prized not only for its lethality, but for its deceptive beauty. Its shiny black berries were as toxic as they were enticing, containing alkaloids that could cause hallucinations, paralysis, and death. A few drops of its extract, delivered through a cut on the skin or into a drink, could kill within hours. Its effects, dilated pupils, flushed skin, delirium, might be mistaken for fever, allowing the assassin to vanish before suspicion fell. Aconite, known as monkshood or wolfsbane, was valued for its rapid action when introduced into the bloodstream. A tiny smear of its root paste on a dagger tip or the sharpened edge of a ring's bezel could be enough to fell a victim within minutes, as the alkaloid slowed the heart and disrupted nerve signals. Aconite was dangerous even to handle. Poisoners used gloves and special tools to prepare it, and the artisans who built poison rings often lined the compartments to prevent the substance from seeping into the metal and inadvertently harming the wearer. Cantharidin, distilled from the crushed bodies of blister beetles, occupied a strange place in the poisoner's arsenal. Though it was sometimes used in questionable medicines or aphrodisiacs, in sufficient doses it caused severe inflammation of the stomach and urinary tract, leading to agony and often death. Its crystalline form made it easy to hide in powder mixtures, though it was less common than plant or mineral toxins because of its distinctive burning effect on the victim's mouth and throat. Mineral poisons like mercury and lead were also known, though their use in rings was less frequent. Mercury salts could kill, but their metallic taste and strong symptoms often betrayed them. Lead, while toxic over long exposure, was too slow for most assassins' purposes. These substances were more often used in the slow poisoning of rivals over weeks or months, hidden in cosmetics or tableware rather than delivered in a single dose from a ring. The preparation of poisons required a level of secrecy equal to that of the ring's construction. Apothecaries who engaged in such work did so under the guise of preparing medicines. Indeed, many poisons in small doses were used legitimately for treatment. The line between cure and curse was perilously thin, and knowledge of that line was the poisoner's greatest advantage. Recipes were guarded as jealously as a goldsmith's mechanical secrets, often committed only to memory to avoid incriminating evidence. Storage was critical. Liquids were often kept in tiny glass or ceramic vials within the ring's compartment, sealed with wax to prevent leaks. Powders could be wrapped in parchment or linen, sometimes mixed with inert substances to disguise them further. The container's interior was often lined with gold or silver, metals resistant to corrosion, ensuring that the poison retained its potency until the moment of use. Delivery was the final consideration. A poison ring could be used to tip powder into a drink or food, but the most cunning designs allowed for direct application to the skin. Certain poisons, such as aconite, could be absorbed transdermally if rubbed into a fresh cut. An assassin might feign a handshake or a courtly caress, scratching the skin just enough for the toxin to enter the bloodstream. In this way, a murder could be committed in the middle of a crowded reception, the victim's fate sealed with a gesture that appeared affectionate. It was this versatility that made poison rings so feared. They could kill in minutes or in months, in public or in private, and the act could be so subtle that no one, perhaps not even the victim, would know it had happened until it was far too late. The poison was not merely a tool of death. It was an extension of the assassin's will, a way to shape events without drawing a blade or raising a voice. Yet poisons carried risks, even for the skilled. A careless slip could contaminate the assassin's own food or drink. A sudden cough during the act of sprinkling powder could send it into the air, where it might be inhaled. Some substances, like mercury compounds, could be absorbed through the skin, making the simple act of loading the ring a potentially fatal task. For this reason, the most successful poisoners were those who understood not only their tools but their own limits, and who treated the act of preparation with the same reverence as the final strike. In the end, the poisons themselves were as much a part of the Renaissance fascination with hidden knowledge as the rings that carried them. They drew on the era's blend of science and superstition, of herbal lore and emerging chemistry. To master them was to hold in one's hand the power of life and death, a power that could alter the fate of a banquet, a court, a kingdom. And for those who wore the ring, the poison was more than a weapon. It was a promise, silent and absolute, that the glittering jewel on their finger was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Not all who possessed a poison ring were killers. Some wore them as talismans of intimidation, a wordless promise that they had the means to end a conversation at any time. But those who did use them, who turned the quiet gleam of a gemstone into a weapon, belonged to a rare and dangerous fraternity. They were the masters of deception, individuals whose skill lay not in brute force but in the careful weaving of appearances, the art of becoming the least suspicious person in any room. Unlike the hired thug or the battlefield mercenary, a poison ring assassin could move within the highest tiers of society. They spoke the languages of diplomacy and art, quoted poets, discussed theology over supper, and danced in the candlelight. They cultivated trust, because trust was the most potent camouflage. Their power lay in their ability to seem indispensable to their victims, to be the confidant, the advisor, the friend, until the precise moment when they became the executioner. The most effective among them were not defined by a single technique, but by their adaptability. In Venice, the mistress of a wealthy merchant might release a drop of aconite into his cordial during a lover's quarrel, the act masked by tears. In Florence, a disgruntled court official might add powdered arsenic to a rival's stew while overseeing the kitchen, disguised as a simple request for seasoning. In the French court, a diplomat might carry a ring filled with powdered cantharides, delivering it with a feigned accident, a brush of the hand, a shared piece of fruit. What bound these individuals together was an acute understanding of human behavior. They knew when a man was most distracted, when a woman might lower her guard, when a rival was drunk enough to lose track of his cup. They studied their targets not just for opportunity, but for vulnerability, moments when the smallest act could become fatal. The ring was only a tool. The true weapon was the assassin's patience. Training for such work could take years. Goldsmiths who crafted poison rings often swore secrecy, producing their pieces only for the most trusted patrons. But acquiring the ring was only the beginning. Masters taught their protégés the fine control needed to open and close the tiny compartment without spilling a drop, to conceal the movement within a gesture as natural as adjusting a sleeve. They learned to keep their breathing steady, their eyes calm, even as they delivered death inches from their victim's face. The psychological burden of the craft was immense. A sword's blow was swift and public. Poison was a slow, intimate kill, requiring the assassin to witness the gradual decline of their target. Some embraced this closeness, seeing it as an assertion of total control. Others hardened themselves against it, reducing the act to a calculated necessity. Still others found themselves haunted by the knowledge that they had destroyed trust itself. The invisible bond that made human society possible. In certain courts, the most skilled poisoners became living legends. Stories of their exploits were embroidered with rumor until fact and fiction were inseparable. A lady-in-waiting who had allegedly dispatched 2 husbands without leaving a trace might be courted as an ally, her reputation a form of invisible armor. A courtier who survived repeated assassination attempts might be rumored to wear his own poison ring, turning every handshake into a gamble. One of the most infamous examples came from Milan, where a man known only as Il Cicero, the Whisper, served 3 successive dukes. He was said to have orchestrated the deaths of political rivals across the Italian states, each demise disguised as a fever, a fall, or an unfortunate accident. Chroniclers claimed he could attend the funeral of his own victim without raising suspicion, speaking of the departed with convincing grief. Whether every story attributed to him was true is uncertain, but his name became a byword for invisible power. To the masters, the ring was more than a device. It was a symbol of control over fate. While others relied on armies, bribes, or open intimidation, they could alter the course of history with the flick of a finger. This subtlety appealed to Renaissance rulers who valued both discretion and results. A public execution might rally sympathy for the victim. A natural death avoided such complications. The very invisibility of their craft also meant the masters often walked a razor's edge. If suspicion fell on them, they could find themselves subjected to the same methods they had perfected. Paranoia was an occupational hazard. They tested their food, drank from sealed flasks, and, in some cases, maintained antidotes hidden in lockets or sewn into the hems of their garments. Trust was a rare commodity, even among fellow practitioners. Yet for all their caution, the masters were also products of their time. The Renaissance was an age that celebrated ingenuity as much as it feared it. Artists, engineers, and philosophers all sought to push the boundaries of their disciplines, and the assassin was no different. The poison ring, for all its grim purpose, was also a marvel of craftsmanship, a collaboration between goldsmith and killer, beauty and death fused into a single artifact. This marriage of artistry and violence reflected the contradictions of the era. Courts commissioned paintings that celebrated divine grace, yet plotted murders in the same rooms. Poets praised the virtues of love, while their patrons schemed to eliminate rivals. The poison ring assassin embodied this duality, moving with grace through the pageantry of Renaissance life, while carrying a silent, lethal truth on their hand. In the end, the masters of deception were not remembered for the jewels they wore, but for the silences they left behind. Conversations cut short by sudden illness, alliances dissolved without a word, dynasties shifted in the absence of a single heartbeat. These were their true legacy. History, when it noticed them at all, recorded their acts in the margins, the space between the grand events. But in those margins lay a quiet power, one that shaped the fate of courts and kingdoms without ever announcing itself. If the ring was the vessel, the poison was its soul. Without the toxin, it was nothing more than an ornament. Exquisite, yes, but inert. What made the poison ring terrifying was not the goldsmith's skill, but the alchemy hidden within. In the Renaissance, the line between science and superstition was thin, and poisons occupied that ambiguous borderland. They were studied by physicians and feared by commoners. brewed in the same rooms where perfumes were distilled and medicines compounded. In the wrong hands, the difference between cure and curse could be measured in grains. Among the most notorious was arsenic, the so-called inheritance powder of the age. Its lack of color, taste, and smell made it the perfect silent killer, especially when dissolved in wine or broth. Slow poisoning with arsenic could mimic the symptoms of natural illness, stomach pain, vomiting, fever, leaving little for a physician to suspect beyond bad fortune. Apothecaries who supplied it often claimed plausible deniability. It was used to kill rats, they would insist, or to treat skin ailments. Yet in noble households, it was whispered that arsenic's true market was not vermin control, but inheritance disputes. Aconite, or monkshood, offered a more dramatic effect. Its alkaloid venom could kill within hours, seizing the heart and lungs in invisible hands. It was favored when the assassin wanted certainty and speed, but its bitter taste required skillful masking, often with strong spices or honeyed wine. Greek and Roman texts had described it centuries before, but the Renaissance gave aconite a resurgence, wrapped in the language of both botany and witchcraft. Cantharides, the powdered remains of the emerald green blister beetle, was another weapon of choice, not because it was the most efficient, but because it was easy to disguise as a love potion. In small doses, it was said to inflame desire. In larger amounts, it inflamed the kidneys to the point of failure. To slip it into a rival's cup could be passed off as a prank or an unfortunate miscalculation in the dangerous game of courtly romance. Then there was belladonna, the beautiful lady of the poison world. Distilled from deadly nightshade, it was used in cosmetics to dilate the pupils, giving women an alluring, dreamlike gaze. The same plant, ingested in sufficient quantity, caused delirium, seizures, and death. For the assassin, it had a macabre elegance. The same substance that made the eyes sparkle could also dim them forever. In Italy, particularly within the Borgia court, there were whispers of more elaborate concoctions, mixtures that blended several poisons in precise proportions, designed to elude detection even by the most skilled physicians. Such recipes were guarded like state secrets, passed between apothecaries and patrons with the gravity of sacred relics. Some were said to be designed for slow decline over weeks, ensuring that the death could be attributed to a wasting disease. Others acted within minutes, ideal for use in the volatile theater of a public banquet. Preparation was an art in itself. The assassin needed not only to choose the right poison for the situation, but also to ensure its stability within the ring. A liquid might evaporate if the compartment was not perfectly sealed. A powder could clump or lose potency if exposed to moisture. Some rings were crafted with tiny glass vials hidden inside, others with wax-sealed chambers to preserve their contents until the decisive moment. Dosage was the assassin's silent arithmetic. Too much, and the victim might taste or smell something amiss. Too little, and the poison would fail to achieve its purpose. Measuring a lethal dose into a space no larger than a lintel required precision and experience. A careless hand might doom not the intended target, but the assassin themselves, particularly with substances like aconite, whose oils could seep into the skin. Beyond the scientific considerations lay the cultural and symbolic ones. Poisons were often associated with the exotic, imported from distant lands and wrapped in tales of strange origins. Opium from the East, curare from the New World, and mysterious powders said to come from Egyptian tombs all fueled the Renaissance appetite for the rare and mysterious. In reality, most assassins preferred local sources, both for convenience and because familiarity bred reliability. But the myth of an untraceable foreign poison had its uses, especially in deflecting suspicion toward faraway enemies. Superstition also played a role. Some believed certain poisons worked better under specific astrological alignments, or that their potency increased if prepared during an eclipse. Others insisted on mixing them with ritual objects. Ground gemstones, a drop of blood, or the ashes of a black cat, as though the physical toxin alone were not enough to guarantee death. Whether these additions had any chemical effect is doubtful, but they added layers of psychological certainty for the assassin. Equally important was the assassin's knowledge of antidotes. To carry poison was to carry risk, and even the most careful operative could face mishap. Renaissance antidotes were a blend of genuine pharmacology and hopeful magic. Theriac, a complex herbal compound descended from Roman recipes. Bezels stones, believed to neutralize toxins, and the ever-present belief in the power of certain wines or broths to draw out the poison. Some poison ring users kept their antidotes as close as their weapons, hidden in lockets or sewn into garments. The moral dimension of these substances was complex. Physicians studying the same plants and minerals could use them to save lives. Aconite as a painkiller in tiny doses, arsenic to treat certain ailments, belladonna to ease muscle spasms. The poison ring assassin inverted this relationship, turning the healer's art into a killer's craft. This duality fascinated Renaissance thinkers, who saw in it a metaphor for the age itself. Beauty and danger intertwined, science and deceit walking hand in hand. Every drop or grain placed inside a poison ring carried a story of the soil it grew from, the hands that harvested it, the apothecary who refined it, and the assassin who chose it. These were not casual tools but deliberate selections, each chosen to match the desired effect, the setting, and the temperament of the target. A slow decline for the rival whose absence needed to look natural. A swift collapse for the political enemy whose death was meant as a warning. A mysterious wasting illness for the lover whose betrayal could not be publicly acknowledged. In the quiet workshop where gold met venom, the craftsman and the poisoner shared a silent understanding. This was art, but art with a singular purpose. And when the ring finally found its way to the hand of its wearer, the true moment of alchemy would come, not in the forging of gold or the distillation of poison, but in the instant when the two became one and beauty itself turned lethal. If the goldsmith's workshop was the cradle of the poison ring, the court was its theater, the stage upon which its beauty could be flaunted and its danger deployed. Renaissance courts were intricate ecosystems where politics, art, and ambition intertwined in ways both dazzling and deadly. They were places where the cut of a doublet, the choice of a gemstone, or the seating arrangement at a banquet could signal the rise or fall of fortunes. It was in this charged atmosphere that the poison ring thrived, not as a crude weapon, but as an instrument of strategy. Nowhere was this more evident than in the courts of Italy, where the city-states of Florence, Venice, and Milan vied for supremacy while navigating the shifting alliances of Europe. Here, the ruling families, the Medici, the Sforza, the Gonzaga, understood that war was not always fought with armies. Influence could be won or lost over the course of a single evening's entertainment, and the most dangerous conflicts unfolded behind closed doors, with poisoned wine as lethal as any soldier's sword. The Medici court in Florence, for instance, was famed for its patronage of the arts, yet beneath the frescoed ceilings and marble halls, a quieter trade thrived. The exchange of secrets, favors, and sometimes toxins. In Rome, the papal court was no less susceptible. The Renaissance popes wielded temporal as well as spiritual power, and the Vatican was a magnet for intrigue. Cardinals competed for influence with monarchs, diplomats, and ambitious clerics. Rumors swirled around certain papal households, none more infamous than that of Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. Whether truth or slander, the Borgia's reputation for poisoning became a permanent fixture of Renaissance gossip, their name synonymous with discreetly administered death. Further north, in France, the Valois court offered its own fertile ground for the poison ring. Catherine de' Medici, herself an Italian noblewoman transplanted into French royalty, brought with her an entourage of apothecaries, astrologers, and rumored poisoners. As queen consort and later regent, she navigated a court riven by religious wars, noble rivalries, and fragile alliances. While her historical guilt in specific poisonings remains debated, her image as a darkly shrewd political player ensured that poison rings, whether truly used or merely feared, became part of her legend. In England, the Tudor court under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I was a more insular, but no less treacherous environment. Here, the poison ring was less a common implement than an exotic curiosity, brought by ambassadors or gifted between allies. Still, the English taste for subtlety and theater made the idea of such a device irresistible. Elizabeth's reign, in particular, saw an influx of foreign courtiers and diplomats, each bringing with them both treasures and whispers of the lethal fashions of the continent. The courts of the Holy Roman Empire were another breeding ground for political gamesmanship, particularly during the reign of emperors who ruled over a patchwork of semi-autonomous states. Here, the poison ring could serve as an equalizer, giving a minor prince or a wealthy merchant the means to neutralize a rival far above his military or economic reach. These courts, often smaller and more intimate than their Italian or French counterparts, offered fewer places to hide a dagger, but plenty of opportunities to hide a drop of poison. Banquets were the natural hunting ground for the poison ring. These events, designed to display wealth and reinforce alliances, gathered together the most important, and often the most vulnerable, figures in a realm. A noblewoman might wear a ring set with a large sapphire, its hidden chamber containing a powder that could be tipped into a rival's wine as she leaned in to exchange pleasantries. A courtier could turn the bezel of his ring with an idle gesture, releasing a droplet into the sauce of a roasted pheasant before sending the platter down the table. The beauty of the poison ring lay in its deniability. In a court where jewelry was as common as tableware, a ring drew no suspicion. Its small movements, the twisting of a stone, the brushing of a hand over a goblet, could be masked in conversation or feigned clumsiness. If the victim fell ill hours later, the connection to a gesture made under candlelight in a crowded hall was almost impossible to prove. And yet, in these same courts, the presence of poison rings had effects beyond their actual use. They became part of the psychological warfare of court life. The knowledge, or even suspicion, that such devices existed made every shared meal a quiet act of trust or mistrust. Hosts hired tasters, an old custom revived not for fear of spoiled food, but of human treachery. Guests eyed one another's jewelry with interest and unease, wondering whether that ornate emerald was merely a fashion statement or a loaded weapon. In some courts, the poison ring became a symbol of status in itself, a mark of the wearer's access to rare craftsmanship and, perhaps, rare opportunities. Goldsmiths and jewelers were discreetly sought not only for their skill, but for their discretion. To be commissioned to make such a piece was to be entrusted with knowledge that could topple dynasties. Many craftsmen in Venice or Florence kept separate ledgers for their most dangerous commissions, or none at all, lest their records fall into the wrong hands. The cultural impact of poison rings extended into art and literature. Playwrights wove them into dramas of betrayal. Poets hinted at them in verses about the dangers of love and ambition. Paintings sometimes depicted a figure with an oddly large ring, a subtle visual metaphor for concealed intentions. These artistic references, while often exaggerated, reinforced the ring's mystique and ensured that its legend outlived many of the courts where it had once been a real and present danger. Ironically, the more famous the poison ring became, the less likely it was to be used openly. By the late Renaissance, in some courts, it was valued as much for its symbolic threat as for its lethal potential. To be seen wearing such a ring could be enough to make enemies cautious, to slow negotiations, to instill just enough fear to shift the balance of power without ever releasing a single drop of poison. Thus, the courts that fed the poison ring were not simply places of execution, but of performance. The ring's power lay as much in its ability to unsettle the mind as to end a life. In that sense, it was the perfect weapon for an age when politics was as much theater as governance, an age that understood the value of a well-timed gesture, a carefully chosen word, and a jewel that could hold death in the palm of a hand. If the Renaissance court was the stage, then the assassins were its actors, men and women who understood the value of timing, the art of disguise, and the intimate dance between predator and prey. In an age when power was fragile and enemies were many, the most effective killers were not those who left bodies in the street, but those whose victims seemed to die from fate's invisible hand. The poison ring was the perfect tool for such work, small, silent, and untraceable. Some wore them as professionals, career assassins employed by the powerful to do what could not be done in daylight. In Italy, where the poisoner's art reached a refinement unmatched elsewhere, these individuals often moved under respectable covers. A merchant visiting a rival city, a servant in a noble household, a messenger delivering diplomatic gifts. They were trained not just in the use of toxins, but in the observation of human habits. The favorite whine of a duke, the nervous tick of a bishop, the precise moment when a goblet might be left unattended. Others were amateurs of necessity, courtiers, lovers, or even family members whose motives were personal. A spurned mistress might accept a commission from a goldsmith and keep the ring close until the moment came, her smile hiding both affection and murder. A younger brother in a dynastic struggle might slip a grain of powdered aconite into the soup of his elder sibling, ensuring that inheritance would come sooner than expected. The stories that have come down to us are a mixture of history and rumor, each feeding the other until separating truth from invention becomes nearly impossible. There is the tale of Giulia Tofana, the infamous poisoner of 17th-century Italy. Though she was known for her cosmetic aqua tofana, whispers claimed she once commissioned a poison ring for a wealthy widow who preferred a more direct delivery. Whether the story is factual or not, it captured the imagination of those who understood how easily luxury and death could be intertwined. In France, the affair of the poisons during the reign of Louis XIV exposed a network of fortune-tellers, alchemists, and poisoners serving members of the nobility. While few poison rings were confiscated in the investigations, several confessions hinted that such devices were prized among those who feared discovery. The ring allowed a poisoner to act without the telltale preparation of bottles, powders, or cups. Its entire arsenal was contained on the assassin's own hand. Some assassins operated not in the courts, but in the chaotic spaces between them, mercenary camps, merchant caravans, and port cities. A Venetian agent in Constantinople might wear a heavy gold ring whose hinged bezel could release a few grains of deadly calomel into a rival's sherbet. In the bustling fairgrounds of Antwerp, a hired killer might lean over a barrel of beer to drop a tincture from his thumb, the gesture hidden in the noise of a merchant's pitch. The poison ring also appealed to those who valued a theatrical death. A few chroniclers speak of assassins who made a show of the moment, turning their rings slowly as they spoke, letting the victim see, or suspect, what was happening, so that fear itself became part of the killing. Whether this was vanity, cruelty, or a calculated effort to send a message to onlookers, it ensured that the act would be remembered long after the body was buried. But for all their skill, assassins who relied on the poison ring took risks. The device required proximity, and proximity could mean recognition. A single mistake, an impatient movement, a spill at the wrong time, a servant's sharp eyes, could end not just the mission, but the life of the assassin. There are records, sparse but chilling, of poisoners caught in the act and forced to swallow their own venom on the spot. The same ring that could guarantee an enemy's silence could ensure the assassin's as well. Training was therefore paramount. Some accounts describe poisoners practicing for weeks with harmless powders, perfecting the motion of the hand so that it became as natural as adjusting a cuff. They learned to disguise the twist of a bezel as a gesture of thought, to mask the release of powder with a cough or a laugh, to use the chaos of a crowded room as cover. The best could slip poison into a cup without ever touching it directly, letting the grains fall from a careful height. The variety of poisons used was as broad as the imagination and resources of the assassin allowed. Some favored fast-acting toxins like cyanide or strychnine, which brought death within minutes, useful for dramatic political statements. Others preferred slow, subtle poisons like arsenic, which could mimic natural illness and spread suspicion rather than certainty. The ring's small chamber meant that the dosage had to be precise, a fact that demanded both chemical knowledge and meticulous preparation. The reputation of the poison ring's wearers far exceeded their actual numbers. Most killings in the Renaissance were still carried out by dagger, arquebus, or open chalice. Yet the image of the assassin with the deadly jewel persisted because it embodied something deeper than the mechanics of murder. It spoke to the fear that one could be smiling at a friend, dancing with a partner, or breaking bread with a fellow courtier, and in that moment be betrayed by the very hand that seemed to offer warmth. Over time, this archetype, the poised, graceful killer whose weapon was indistinguishable from ornament, took root in the culture. Artists painted figures with heavy, ornate rings on their index fingers, a subtle nod to hidden danger. Writers built villains who toyed with their prey while turning the stone of their ring between thumb and forefinger. Even when poison rings were not in use, their legends shaped the way people saw one another's hands. The assassins who wore them knew this. They understood that their true weapon was not the poison itself, but the knowledge that it might be there. Fear could slow a rival's advance, bend negotiations, or force a treaty before the first drop was ever released. The ring was as much about influence as about elimination, and in the hands of a skilled assassin, that influence could be more devastating than death. The poison ring was only as effective as the substance it concealed. The finest goldsmith in Florence could craft a bezel so seamless that it defied discovery, but without the right venom, it was little more than an ornament. To understand the full menace of these devices, one must open the chamber itself and find within the silent grains, oily droplets, or powdered crystals that transform jewelry into a weapon. In the Renaissance, poison was not merely a tool, it was a language of power. The choice of toxin could speak volumes about the killer's intent. Was the death meant to be quick and shocking, or slow and subtle? Should it mimic an illness to avoid suspicion, or strike with unmistakable swiftness to send a message? The answer determined not only the poison selected but the way the ring was designed, the size of the compartment, the nature of its seal, the ease of its release. Arsenic was perhaps the most infamous choice, a mineral that could be ground into a fine white powder almost indistinguishable from sugar or flour. It was inexpensive, widely available to apothecaries, and devastatingly effective in small doses. A pinch from the hollow of a ring could bring nausea, vomiting, and death within hours or days, depending on the amount. The advantage for the assassin was in its ambiguity. Arsenic poisoning often resembled common illnesses of the time, such as dysentery, making suspicion difficult to prove. Aconite, also known as wolfsbane or monkshood, was another favorite, though its preparation was more delicate. Derived from a flowering plant with beautiful purple blossoms, aconite acted swiftly, attacking the nervous system and bringing numbness, paralysis, and ultimately heart failure. Its bitterness made it harder to disguise in food or drink, but a skilled poisoner could mix it into strongly flavored dishes or apply it to an object the victim would touch, allowing absorption through the skin. Cyanide, though not commonly named as such in the Renaissance, existed in certain plant-derived forms, particularly from bitter almonds and cherry pits. In tiny, concentrated doses, it brought rapid suffocation at the cellular level, leaving the victim gasping and unconscious in minutes. Its swiftness made it risky. If the timing was off or the victim was surrounded by attentive allies, the assassin could be caught before slipping away. Mercury salts, particularly mercuric chloride, found use among those who preferred a slow unraveling of the body. The metal's toxic properties were known even before the Renaissance, and its effects, salivation, tremors, mental confusion, and eventual death, could be mistaken for a wasting disease. The metallic taste it left could be masked with wine or heavy sauces, and its persistence in the body made it effective for prolonged schemes. Some assassins turned to more exotic sources. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was famed for its dual identity. In small doses, it was used cosmetically to dilate pupils and enhance beauty. In larger ones, it caused delirium, hallucinations, and death. It was a fitting poison for the age, seductive, dangerous, and tied to the very concept of allure. Hemlock, the ancient executioner's herb, could be distilled into a potent liquid that caused muscle paralysis without immediate pain. Opium, though primarily valued as a sedative and painkiller, could be rendered deadly in excessive concentrations, lulling the victim into a final, endless sleep. The methods of preparing these poisons were as varied as the substances themselves. Apothecaries and alchemists served as the silent partners of assassins, their workshops a mix of legitimate trade and shadow work. Officially, they sold medicines, perfumes, and tinctures. Unofficially, they provided measured doses of toxins, often disguised in vials of common remedies. Many developed techniques for stabilizing poisons so they would remain potent for weeks or months within a ring-sealed chamber. Secrecy was vital. Even within the underworld of Renaissance poisoners, knowledge of preparation was closely guarded. Recipes were committed to memory or hidden in coded manuscripts, with symbols that could pass for astrological diagrams or alchemical formulae. Some were family secrets, passed from parent to child as part of a grim inheritance. The penalty for revealing such knowledge without permission was often death, delivered, perhaps fittingly, by the very substances being betrayed. Superstition also played a role. Certain poisoners believed that the efficacy of a toxin could be enhanced through ritual, harvesting plants under a full moon, mixing powders with water drawn from a specific well, or reciting incantations over the finished product. Whether these rites had any effect on the chemistry of the poison is doubtful, but their psychological value was undeniable. An assassin who believed their weapon was blessed or cursed carried it with greater conviction. The poison's physical form determined its mode of delivery. Powders could be tipped into wine or sprinkled over food. Oily extracts could be smeared onto a handkerchief, glove, or even the rim of a drinking vessel. In rare and particularly sinister cases, a poison was applied directly to the skin, hidden in a handshake or a brush of fingers. The poison ring's mechanism was designed accordingly: a hinged lid for powders, a narrow spout for liquids, or a small groove for smearing onto a surface. The dosages were minute, yet precision was essential. Too little, and the victim might survive and know they had been targeted. Too much, and the symptoms could be so obvious that suspicion fell immediately upon the wronged party. The ideal dose was one that worked invisibly, ensuring that the victim's last moments were free of any clue as to the cause. This was the art within the art, the blend of chemistry, anatomy, and psychology that separated the master poisoner from the amateur. Inevitably, accidents occurred. There are records of would-be assassins succumbing to their own weapons, their fingers contaminated during preparation, or their rings leaking in heat. Goldsmiths learned to line the chambers with glass or enamel to prevent reactions between metal and toxin, a refinement that saved more than one life. Still, the risk was ever present. To carry death on one's hand was to live with its shadow always near. By the late Renaissance, some courts attempted to regulate or outlaw the possession of certain poisons, particularly among the nobility. Yet the very people charged with enforcing these rules were often those who commissioned the deadliest rings. It was a hypocrisy woven into the fabric of the age, public morality bowing to private ambition. The poisons themselves became as much a part of the legend as the rings. A whispered mention of arsenic in Venice or aconite in Florence could chill a conversation. Recipes became currency among spies, tokens of trust among conspirators, and the subject of fearful speculation among servants. The contents of a ring could define its owner's reputation, whether as a subtle manipulator, a ruthless executioner, or a dangerous enigma. And always, the fear endured that somewhere in the laughter and light of a banquet hall, a hand might turn slightly, a stone might shift, and a poison measured in grains or drops could erase a life, a legacy, or a kingdom. The poison was not only a substance, it was a promise. To the casual observer, the Renaissance goldsmith was a craftsman of refinement, a man whose hands coaxed beauty from metal, whose skill elevated raw gold into rings, brooches, and chalices worthy of dukes and cardinals. His name might be known in noble circles, his shopfront adorned with delicate works displayed in velvet-lined cases. Yet behind some of those glittering facades, another business thrived, one whispered only to the bold or the desperate, the making of rings whose purpose was not to adorn, but to kill. The commission of a poison ring was never written in a ledger. No design was sketched in the open daylight of the workshop. It began with a quiet conversation, often in the back room, behind a curtain or a locked door. The client might be a wealthy patron cloaked in fur, a courtier whose smile was as polished as his lies, or a veiled noblewoman who spoke softly but with unshakable intent. Payment was generous, sometimes in coin, but more often in jewels or favors that could not be bought. In exchange, the goldsmith was asked to build a piece of jewelry with an invisible heart. The goldsmith's challenge was to unite elegance with secrecy. The ring had to pass inspection by friends and enemies alike without betraying its purpose. The secret compartment must be large enough to hold a lethal dose of powder or liquid, yet small enough to remain invisible to the eye. Mechanisms were designed to open silently, often with a single press or twist that only the wearer knew. Hinges were disguised beneath ornate engravings, clasps hidden in the curve of a filigree. The Renaissance goldsmith was part artist, part engineer, part conspirator. Those who took such commissions lived in a shadowed corner of their trade, knowing that discovery could mean ruin or execution. In many city-states, the making of a hidden weapon was a crime. Yet the demand for such work was steady enough to sustain a small network of artisans willing to risk their lives for the right price. Work began with the selection of metal, usually gold, which resisted corrosion from both skin oils and many toxins. The band was crafted thick enough to conceal a hollow chamber without appearing clumsy. If the client requested a gemstone, the stone often served a dual purpose, as a decorative centerpiece and as a lid for the poison compartment. The finest lapidaries could mount a jewel in such a way that it pivoted slightly on its setting, revealing the cavity beneath. The mechanism itself was a marvel of precision. Tiny hinges, sometimes no larger than a grain of rice, were forged and polished until they moved without a whisper. Spring catches were hidden under ornamental patterns, designed so that the wearer's thumb or forefinger could trigger them in a single smooth motion. For liquid poisons, the chamber might be lined with glass or enamel to prevent reaction with the metal. For powders, the opening had to be wide enough to allow a discreet pour, but narrow enough to avoid accidental spillage. Some goldsmiths innovated beyond simple storage. There are accounts, though their authenticity cannot be fully verified, of rings designed with a minute needle projecting from the inner band, meant to pierce the skin of a handshake or a casual touch. Others were fitted with channels that allowed liquid to drip directly into a cup when the hand was held above it. In Venice, a jeweler reportedly created a ring that could crush a concealed poison capsule with the pressure of a finger, releasing its contents instantly. Every commission carried an unspoken agreement. The goldsmith would never ask who the target was, and the client would never speak of where the ring came from. Some artisans took extra precautions, delivering the finished piece in pieces that the client had to assemble, ensuring the maker could claim ignorance if questioned. In extreme cases, the ring was created in secret compartments of the workshop, with assistants kept away and the door barred until the work was complete. The moral burden of such work varied from one craftsman to another. Some justified it as merely fulfilling a client's wishes, no different, they argued, from a swordsmith forging a blade. Others took a more cynical view, believing that if they refused, another goldsmith would accept the commission, and they might as well profit. A few saw themselves as silent players in the grand theater of power, their rings deciding the fate of dukes and dynasties without ever drawing a blade. Yet danger was constant. Rivals might betray a goldsmith to the authorities, or a client might be captured and interrogated, naming the maker in desperation. To guard against this, some artisans worked under false names or through intermediaries. A jeweler in Milan might send his designs to be built by an associate in Florence, then receive the finished ring back through a merchant caravan, ensuring no single city could connect him to the crime. The reputations of these craftsmen became part of the undercurrent of Renaissance rumor. Among nobles, it was said that certain goldsmiths could make a ring so perfect that the Pope himself could not detect its hidden chamber. In the back rooms of taverns, assassins and mercenaries spoke of rings that could open even if the wearer were wearing gloves, or that could be triggered without looking down. Some of these stories were surely exaggerations, others disturbingly plausible. The artistry of these rings extended to their outward beauty. No matter how deadly the interior, the exterior was a work of high craft. Bands were engraved with scrolling vines, saints' images, or heraldic emblems. Gemstones were chosen for their brilliance as much as for their concealment potential. Rubies and sapphires for power, emeralds for wealth, diamonds for timelessness. To wear such a ring was to display status. To know its secret was to carry death in the midst of splendor. By the late 16th century, certain goldsmiths had developed signatures invisible to the untrained eye. A particular curve of a hinge, a style of engraving, a way of setting stones that could be recognized by those in the know. These details served as both a mark of pride and a form of protection, a message to potential clients that the maker was skilled, discreet, and trusted. The paradox of the goldsmith's dark commission was this: the better the work, the less it was noticed. A sword could be admired, a chalice displayed, But a poison ring succeeded only when it passed unnoticed in the light of day, its beauty taken for granted. The craftsman's triumph was measured not in applause, but in silence. And somewhere, perhaps at the edge of a banquet table or in the quiet corner of a garden, a hand would turn, a mechanism would click, and the goldsmith's work would vanish into a goblet, a morsel, or a touch, leaving behind nothing but the certainty that the commission had been worth every ducat. In the great palaces of the Renaissance, life was an endless performance. Theatrical in its beauty and calculated in its every gesture, the court was a place where a man's smile might hide contempt, and a woman's courtesy could veil a plan for ruin. Power shifted not with the clash of armies, but with the closing of doors, the exchange of glances, and the quiet decision to remove a rival. The poison ring, invisible among the splendor of brocade and silk, thrived in this world as the most discreet of conspirators. Every court had its own ecosystem of ambition. Pages and chamberlains, ladies-in-waiting and musicians, envoys and advisors. All of them lived under the gaze of the ruler, competing for favor, patronage, and proximity. A noble could rise from obscurity to influence with a single alliance, and fall into exile or disgrace with the faintest whisper of scandal. In this environment, the removal of a rival was not only an act of vengeance, but a calculated step in the choreography of survival. Banquets were the most dangerous ground. Long tables stretched beneath frescoed ceilings, the air heavy with roasted meats, candied fruits, and the perfume of crushed herbs. Here, enemies sat within arm's reach of one another, their goblets filled and refilled by servants who moved like shadows. A poison ring could be deployed with elegance, the wearer lifting a hand to adjust a sleeve, tilting it just enough for a measured drop of liquid or powder to fall into wine. The victim, laughing at a jest or leaning toward a companion, would never notice the subtle movement that sealed their fate. The stories, half-truths, half-invention, flowed through every royal residence. In Florence, it was said that a Medici cousin, too ambitious for the comfort of the reigning duke, had fallen suddenly ill after a feast. In France, a lady of the court whispered that her rival for the king's affection had died 3 days after receiving a sweetmeat from her hand. In Spain, a foreign ambassador left Madrid in perfect health, only to collapse on the road before reaching the border, a demise attributed, in the gossamer threads of rumor, to a ring that had glittered on the queen's finger. Poison rings suited the Renaissance taste for the elaborate and the concealed. Their very existence embodied the era's paradox, a fascination with beauty paired with a willingness to embrace calculated cruelty. A sword could spill blood in the open, but a poison ring killed without noise or spectacle. It required the patience of a chess master, the skill of an actor, and the will to play a long game. For those who wore them, the ring was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one, a reminder to their enemies that danger could come smiling across the table. The political alliances of the period made poison an especially appealing tool. Marriages between ruling families were contracts sealed in silk, and breaking them openly was costly. A death that could be blamed on illness, misadventure, or the mysterious hand of God allowed rulers to rearrange alliances without the stain of treachery. A carefully placed poison ring could serve not only a personal vendetta but the ambitions of a faction or an entire state. In some courts, suspicion was constant. Guests at certain banquets preferred to pour their own wine, and those of high rank often traveled with food tasters, a dangerous but respected profession. The presence of tasters did not end the threat. It merely forced poisoners to adjust their methods. Some rings were designed to deliver toxins that acted slowly, manifesting symptoms days or weeks later, long after the victim had left the feast. In such cases, the poisoner's hand was nearly impossible to trace. The courts also produced a subtler use for the poison ring: intimidation. A rumor that a noblewoman owned such a ring could cause rivals to avoid accepting gifts from her hand. A courtier whose fingers glittered with ornate jewels might never use the weapon at all, yet benefit from the fear it inspired. In a place where reputation could be as potent as reality, the mere suspicion of a poison ring was sometimes as effective as the device itself. The physical environment of the court lent itself to opportunity. Audiences with the ruler were intimate affairs, a private chamber, a few trusted attendants, and a table bearing refreshments. Ceremonial hand-kissing, a custom in many courts, provided another occasion. A deft movement could allow a drop of toxin to be left on the skin or even on a lace cuff, where it might later be touched to the lips. It was not only nobles and royals who wielded such tools. Courtiers in the employ of foreign powers, spies, envoys, and double agents found the poison ring invaluable. Diplomacy in the Renaissance was a perilous endeavor. Envoys traveled with letters of alliance in one hand and orders for assassination in the other. The poison ring was light, easily concealed, and plausible as an ornament even in hostile territory. For all its secrecy, the presence of such devices was not entirely invisible. Chroniclers occasionally recorded deaths that bore the marks of careful poisoning, and though no ring was ever produced as evidence, the suggestion lingered in the margins of history. Poets hinted at it in veiled verses, satirists mocked it in plays, moralists condemned it in sermons. Yet no ruler ever publicly banned the wearing of rings, for to do so would be to admit that the court was vulnerable to its own finery. The legacy of these whispered deaths is difficult to separate from the myths they inspired. Some tales are undoubtedly inventions, crafted to tarnish reputations or embellish family legends. Others bear the weight of probability, supported by patterns of illness, sudden death, and the convenient shifting of political fortunes. In the end, the poison ring's greatest power may have been its ability to blur the line between truth and rumor, leaving every glass of wine and every shared plate open to suspicion. In these courts, survival depended not only on the ability to charm or command, but on the wisdom to recognize when beauty might be a mask for danger. The same hands that offered friendship could just as easily deliver death, and every banquet might be the stage for a final, silent act. In such a world, the poison ring was more than an accessory. It was a perfect emblem of Renaissance politics, dazzling in appearance, deadly in intention, and utterly inseparable from the theater in which it played its part. The poison ring may have been a marvel of goldsmithing, but it was useless without its most essential companion, the toxin it carried. In the Renaissance, the mastery of poison was as much an art as the design of the ring itself. Apothecaries, herbalists, and alchemists, some celebrated for their healing skill, others whispered about for their darker talents, created venoms that could kill in moments or unravel a body over days. To the trained hand, the choice of poison was as deliberate as the choice of target. The Renaissance inherited a deep legacy of toxic knowledge. From the Greeks came accounts of hemlock, used to end the lives of philosophers condemned by the state. From Rome came the lore of aconite and the legendary schemes of the Locusta, the empire's most infamous poisoner. The Arabs had preserved and expanded the pharmacopoeia, translating and refining the ancient texts of Dioscorides and Galen, and introducing new botanical discoveries from the East. By the 15th and 16th centuries, this knowledge was enriched by the voyages of exploration, which brought home new and unfamiliar poisons from the Americas, Africa, and Asia. For the poison ring, the toxin had to meet specific requirements. It needed to be potent in small quantities, as the ring's chamber could hold only a pinch of powder or a few drops of liquid. It needed to be stable enough to be carried without losing its strength, yet volatile enough to dissolve quickly when mixed into food or drink. Ideally, it would have symptoms that mimicked natural illness, allowing the assassin to avoid suspicion. One of the most notorious choices was arsenic, particularly arsenic trioxide, a white powder without taste or odor that dissolved readily in wine or broth. Its effects, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and eventual organ failure, could be mistaken for a sudden fever or spoiled food. The Italian courts of the 16th century became so associated with arsenic that it earned the grim nickname pulvera di succession, the powder of succession. Another common choice was powdered cantharides, or Spanish fly, derived from the blister beetle. While often used in dangerously misguided aphrodisiacs, in sufficient doses it could inflame the urinary tract, cause convulsions, and lead to death. For a slow and more insidious attack, some poisoners favored mercury salts, which gradually eroded the victim's health over weeks, making the decline appear natural. Plant-based poisons were equally prized. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, was valued for its dual uses. A drop could dilate the pupils for beauty, but larger amounts could cause hallucinations delirium, and death. Aconitum, or monkshood, worked swiftly, paralyzing the heart and lungs. Hemlock, though less favored for the ring due to its bitter taste, was still employed when it could be masked in strong-flavored dishes. Then there were the exotic toxins, imported at great cost and valued for their rarity. Curare from the Amazon, brought back by explorers, was deadly when introduced into the bloodstream. Though its utility in food was limited, it could be applied to a blade or needle concealed in a ring. Opium derivatives could also be used, particularly when the aim was to incapacitate rather than kill outright. The preparation of these poisons was not a task for the unskilled. Alchemists refined arsenic by roasting arsenic ores to produce the pure white powder. Herbalists distilled belladonna berries, removing excess plant matter to concentrate the atropine within. Beetles were dried and crushed, their toxic compounds extracted and preserved. Every step required precision. An error could render the poison ineffective, or worse, accidentally kill the poisoner before the intended victim ever touched it. Many of these specialists worked in the gray space between legitimate medicine and clandestine murder. The same arsenic that might be used to treat skin conditions could, in other hands, become a weapon. The same mercury used in ointments for syphilis could be repurposed into a lethal dose. The line between healing and harming was perilously thin, and in an age without forensic science, the intention was often invisible. Some poison rings were designed with ingenious delivery mechanisms that matched the nature of the toxin. A ring meant to hold powder might have a tiny spoon-shaped opening beneath the bezel, allowing a controlled sprinkle into a drink. Others were fitted with minute tubes or channels for liquid poisons, released by a twist of the setting. In rare cases, the ring might have a hidden needle, used to prick the skin and deliver a toxin directly into the bloodstream, a method requiring deadly accuracy and proximity. Choosing the poison was as much a political decision as a chemical one. A quick-acting toxin might be used for a killing that needed to send a message, its victim collapsing dramatically in public. A slow-working poison allowed for deniability, giving the assassin time to leave the city before the target's decline became fatal. Some poisoners even tailored their toxins to the habits of their victims, selecting flavors and consistencies that blended seamlessly into favored dishes. Rumors swirled around certain courts about the existence of poisoners whose skills rivaled those of the finest chefs. These figures, if they existed, would have been masters of both taste and death, able to lace a spiced wine or sugared almond with a substance that left no trace on the tongue. Chroniclers whispered of recipes locked away in ciphered books, guarded like the most sacred of treasures, each ingredient coded under an innocent-sounding name. The danger of handling such substances was ever present. Many poisoners took elaborate precautions, using silver or ivory tools, wearing gloves of fine leather, or grinding powders behind masks of dampened cloth. Still, accidents happened. There are accounts, some perhaps embellished, of assassins who succumbed to their own wares, a single breath of dust or a careless touch sealing their fate. The culture of poison in the Renaissance was not merely about death. It was bound up in the era's fascination with control. To slip a drop from a ring into a cup was to master the fate of another person completely, to wield power invisibly. In this, the poison ring mirrored the broader ambitions of its age. To command events from behind a curtain, to shape history with a gesture so small that no one saw it until the moment it was too late. It is worth noting that much of what we know about these toxins and their use in rings comes from sources tinged with rumor and moral outrage. Chroniclers delighted in tales of courtly treachery, and accusations of poisoning were a convenient way to tarnish reputations. The actual frequency of poison ring use remains uncertain, but the chemistry, the craft, and the fear they inspired were very real. In the end, the science of subtle toxins was not purely a matter of pharmacology. It was an alchemy of ambition and fear, of opportunity and skill. Whether in the hands of a noblewoman seeking revenge, a spy fulfilling a mission, or a ruler ensuring the stability of their reign, the poison chosen for a ring was always more than a mere substance. It was the final stroke in a work of political art, invisible, precise, and irreversible. In the tapestry of Renaissance intrigue, a handful of figures stand out, wrapped in equal parts truth and myth, their names forever linked to the whispered menace of the poison ring. While definitive proof is elusive, as with most clandestine arts, the stories have survived because they combine two elements the era could never resist: scandal and fear. Perhaps the most frequently cited is Lucrezia Borgia, the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, whose name has become synonymous with poisoning in the popular imagination. Chroniclers hostile to the Borgias allege that she possessed a hollow ring capable of delivering powdered arsenic into a cup during banquets. Whether she ever used it remains uncertain. Much of the evidence against her originates from political enemies eager to vilify the family. Nonetheless, her reputation endured as the archetype of the beautiful and deadly noblewoman, her elegance concealing an assassin's precision. Then there was Caterina de' Medici, who, as Queen of France, was accused by Huguenot pamphleteers of mastering the Italian art of poisoning. According to these accounts, she distributed poison rings as gifts to trusted agents, each capable of slipping a fatal dose into a goblet at court. These tales painted her as a shadowy puppet master orchestrating political deaths behind the veil of diplomacy. Historians caution that much of this is Protestant propaganda, yet the Medici court did employ skilled apothecaries, and the overlap between cosmetics, medicine, and poison made the accusations plausible enough to haunt her legacy. In Venice, the case of Antonio Foscarini in 1622 offers a glimpse of how accusations of poison rings could intersect with political paranoia. Foscarini, a Venetian nobleman, was accused of treason and executed. Among the charges leveled against him was that he had plotted to use poison, possibly delivered via a ring, against rivals. Later investigations suggested his conviction was the result of false testimony, but the mere association with such a method was enough to justify swift and fatal judgment in the eyes of the state. The courts of the smaller Italian city-states were equally fertile ground for rumors. In Ferrara, the Este family was said to keep a cabinet of curiosities that included rings with concealed compartments. A later chronicler claimed one such ring had been used to dispatch an inconvenient diplomat whose death was recorded as a sudden illness after a feast. In Mantua, a widow accused of multiple suspicious deaths was rumored to have worn a garnet ring whose gemstone lifted to reveal a cavity for powdered belladonna. No trial records survive, leaving the story suspended between fact and fiction. Outside Italy, the legend of the poison ring traveled north. In Tudor England, rumors swirled around the court of Elizabeth I about plots to assassinate the Queen with exotic devices, including rings. The Earl of Leicester's enemies accused him of murdering his wife Amy Robsart, and, in later whispers, of planning to use a poison ring against political rivals. No evidence ever emerged, but the fear of concealed poisoners was real enough to influence the design of court etiquette, with certain monarchs refusing to drink wine offered by unfamiliar hands. France, too, had its share of scandal. The affair of the poisons in the 1670s, though slightly beyond the Renaissance, pulled back the curtain on an underworld of fortune-tellers, alchemists, and poisoners operating within the aristocracy. While no surviving trial documents explicitly mention poison rings, the confessions describe small containers and delivery methods eerily similar to ring mechanisms. The most notorious figure of the affair, Lavoisin, was accused of supplying poisons to courtiers, including powders and liquids potent enough to kill unnoticed. The theatrical flourish of a jeweled ring as the delivery method would have fit perfectly into such a milieu. One of the more chilling accounts comes from the Spanish Netherlands, where an envoy reportedly collapsed during a diplomatic reception in Brussels in the late 16th century. A surviving letter from a witness describes the envoy being offered sugared almonds by a courtier who wore an ornate gold ring. The almonds were said to have been dusted with a fine powder as they were presented. The envoy died within hours, and the courtier vanished the next day. Whether the ring was truly the means or merely a flourish added by the storyteller, the tale entered local folklore as a warning about courtly gifts. The poison ring's reputation was such that even suspicion could destroy lives. In 1585, a Florentine goldsmith named Bartolomeo di Rossi was arrested on charges of supplying such a ring to a mercenary captain. Rossi insisted the piece was an ordinary reliquary ring meant to hold a fragment of a saint's bone. The court, unconvinced, banished him from Florence for life. His exile was a reminder that in an age where poison was seen as the weapon of choice for the subtle and the ambitious, crafting the wrong kind of jewel could be as dangerous as using it. Not all famous cases involved noble courts. Some emerged from the underworld. In the alleys of Naples, the Veleno del Veduve, the widow's poison, was whispered about among thieves and hired killers. This concoction, a blend of arsenic and crushed toadstool, was supposedly sold in tiny doses hidden inside cheap brass rings. The buyers were often women trapped in abusive marriages, desperate for escape. While such stories are difficult to verify, the persistence of the term suggests the idea of the poison ring had filtered far beyond the palaces and into the imagination of the streets. Yet for every recorded or alleged case, there were likely others that left no trace. The genius of the poison ring was that it left so little behind. No dagger to be discovered, no arrow to be traced, only the slow fade of a victim's health or the sudden, unexplained collapse after a toast. This invisibility ensured that the most successful uses remained forever hidden, known only to the perpetrator and, for a brief, fatal moment, the victim. Historians must tread carefully in parsing these stories. The absence of forensic science meant that sudden deaths could be, and often were, attributed to poisoning without proof. Enemies inflated the dangers, storytellers embellished the details, and the jewelers themselves, if guilty, took their secrets to the grave. But whether each case was true or not, the fact that so many were believed says something profound about the Renaissance mindset. In an age of spectacle and ceremony, the deadliest act was the one no one saw. Fear of death is the quiet architect of human behavior, and nowhere was this more visible than in the Renaissance courts where the poison ring was rumored to flourish. Long before modern security details and forensic science, the protection of a ruler or noble depended on vigilance, ritual, and an understanding that threats were often invisible. Once the idea of a hollow ring capable of delivering death in a heartbeat entered the political imagination, it spread like a contagion, influencing etiquette, dictating the layout of banquets, and altering even the most intimate gestures between the powerful. One of the earliest adaptations was the rise of the assaggiatore, the official food taster. In Italian city-states, France, and Spain, trusted servants were employed to sample every dish and sip every drink before they reached the lips of a monarch. Their role was more ceremonial than foolproof. Many poisons of the era acted slowly, making it possible for a ruler to survive the meal only to succumb hours or days later. Still, the presence of a taster was a public display of caution, signaling to friend and foe alike that the ruler understood the dangers. Banquet halls themselves were reshaped by paranoia. Tables grew longer, with rulers seated at elevated dais far from the casual reach of guests. Cups and utensils were often kept under lock and key until the moment of use, then swiftly removed. In some courts, such as that of the Medici in Florence, elaborate silverware with replaceable heads was introduced so that a fresh fork or spoon could be brought mid-meal, reducing the opportunity for an assassin to brush a toxic powder onto its surface. Gloves became a fashion not just for style, but for survival. The idea that a poison ring might be used to smear venom on the skin, a contact poison derived from aconite or wolfsbane, made barehanded greetings suspect. In certain courts, it was customary for guests to keep their gloves on during introductions, even in the presence of royalty. Where gloves were removed, servants might discreetly hand their masters a perfumed cloth, both as refreshment and as a precautionary wipe against any residue. The simple act of drinking became a performance of caution. In the French court, it was not uncommon for wine to be poured directly from sealed casks in the ruler's presence, rather than from decanters prepared elsewhere. In England, Elizabeth I is said to have kept her own cups and had them filled only by a small circle of trusted attendants, each sworn to secrecy about the handling of her food and drink. Whether these measures directly prevented poisonings is unclear, but their symbolic weight was undeniable. Jewelers, too, found themselves under scrutiny. In cities like Venice and Antwerp, where goldsmithing was both an art and an economic pillar, guilds began to monitor commissions more closely. Some guild statutes explicitly forbade the crafting of compartments or concealed receptacles, in rings without disclosure to the authorities. In practice, this was difficult to enforce. Private commissions for nobility often bypassed guild oversight entirely. Still, the public stance was clear. To create a ring capable of holding poison was to risk being branded an accomplice to treachery. The paranoia extended to the servants who handled personal effects. Valets and ladies-in-waiting might be tasked with inspecting their master's jewelry before public appearances, ensuring that no suspicious residue clung to the settings. In some households, particularly in Spain's Habsburg court, guests were discouraged from presenting personal gifts of jewelry during banquets, a precaution aimed squarely at preventing the exchange of weaponized adornments. But perhaps the most telling adaptation was in the choreography of courtly life itself. The Renaissance was an age of elaborate ritual. Audiences with rulers followed strict patterns of movement and gesture, each designed to project authority. Once the poison ring entered the cultural lexicon, subtle changes appeared. Fewer moments when a guest might lean close enough to a ruler's cup, fewer instances where the ruler's hands and tableware were exposed to touch. At the height of French court paranoia in the 16th century, even the distribution of toasts was regulated, with specific officers appointed to carry drinks directly to the ruler and take them away again after the sip. Some courts embraced alchemy and science in their defensive measures. The Medici commissioned apothecaries to prepare antidotes and universal theriacs, complex mixtures of herbs, resins, and minerals believed to counteract poison. These were kept in small jeweled boxes at the ruler's side, ready to be swallowed at the first sign of distress. While modern toxicology would question their effectiveness, their presence offered psychological comfort, and the rituals surrounding their use were part of the theater of survival. The more cunning rulers went further, turning paranoia into a weapon of their own. By publicizing the precautions they took, they sent a message to would-be assassins. Any attempt would be futile. This was particularly effective in courts where fear itself was a form of control. The image of a ruler surrounded by loyal tasters, watchful guards, and unassailable etiquette reinforced the idea of invincibility. Whether or not it was true mattered less than the belief it inspired. Yet for all these measures, the fear could never be fully banished. Poison was, by its nature, a weapon of uncertainty, and the poison ring, compact and elegant, embodied that uncertainty perfectly. It thrived in the spaces between trust and suspicion, between the gesture of friendship and the act of betrayal. Countermeasures could make the assassin's task more difficult, but they could not erase the possibility. Even in the most guarded courts, a ruler might still raise a cup, smile at a guest, and wonder, just for a moment, whether the warmth of the wine concealed something colder. That fleeting doubt, that shadow in the back of the mind, was the true legacy of the poison ring. It was not just an object of death. It was a sculptor of behavior, shaping the rituals, relationships, and very architecture of power in the Renaissance. And in that sense, the paranoia it inspired may have been more enduring than the deaths it caused. The poison ring's decline did not come suddenly, nor was it the result of a single decree or innovation. Like many tools of intrigue, it faded in stages, its menace blunted by changing tastes, evolving politics, and the rise of new forms of both warfare and assassination. By the late 17th century, the ring that had once been whispered about in palaces and feared across banquet tables was more likely to be seen in a collector's cabinet than on the hand of a killer. Yet its disappearance tells as much about the changing world as its creation once did. The Renaissance world in which the poison ring thrived was one of fragmented states, dynastic rivalries, and personal diplomacy. A single banquet could decide the fate of alliances, and rulers lived in close proximity to both friends and enemies. By the late 1600s, however, the consolidation of larger nation-states and the growth of centralized bureaucracies began to change the rhythms of power. Courts became less intimate, more structured, and increasingly removed from the physical proximity that made the ring so dangerous. Security measures, honed over decades of paranoia, became institutionalized. Permanent guards, standardized food preparation procedures, and architectural design all worked to increase the distance between rulers and their guests. The days of a duke and his rival sharing the same trencher of food had largely passed. In many courts, monarchs dined in a raised gallery, separated from the main hall, where food and drink passed through layers of inspection before reaching them. The poison ring, designed for swift, discreet delivery, simply lost many of the opportunities it once relied upon. Equally decisive was the transformation of taste in fashion and ornament. The monumental jewelry of the High Renaissance gave way to lighter, more delicate styles in the Baroque and Rococo periods. Rings became slimmer, gemstones smaller, and bezels more transparent. The bulky, hinged tops of earlier poison rings no longer suited the prevailing aesthetic. A concealed compartment, once a marvel of craftsmanship, would now appear awkward or suspicious amid the era's emphasis on refinement and proportion. Advances in science, too, began to erode the fear of undetectable poisoning. While toxicology as we understand it was still centuries away, the late 17th century saw an increased interest in natural philosophy and medicine. Court physicians became more skilled at diagnosing illness and, at times, identifying suspicious symptoms. This was not enough to expose every poisoner, but it did begin to shift the balance between myth and reality. The aura of invincibility surrounding the poison ring, its ability to kill without leaving a trace, slowly diminished. There was also a subtle shift in the politics of assassination. Gunpowder weapons, already centuries old, became more reliable and widespread. The arquebus and pistol offered means of killing that were public, immediate, and often politically symbolic. Assassination by blade or shot carried with it the image of bold action. By contrast, death by poison increasingly appeared cowardly or dishonorable in certain circles. In this shifting culture of martial honor, the poison ring became less the emblem of a cunning statesman and more the relic of a bygone age of shadowy dealings. Some rings survived by transformation. The compartments once intended for deadly powders were repurposed to hold perfumes, devotional relics, or even miniature portraits. A few were kept as novelties or conversation pieces, their deadly potential replaced by sentimental value. In some cases, families who had inherited such rings quietly removed their mechanisms, perhaps out of prudence, perhaps out of superstition. The original purpose was remembered only in whispers or footnotes in estate inventories. Collectors and antiquarians of the 18th century began to prize these relics of intrigue. In an age fascinated by the Renaissance as a period of both artistic genius and dangerous politics, the poison ring became an object of curiosity rather than fear. Gentlemen travelers returning from Italy or France might boast of acquiring such a ring from a noble family, its compartment now empty, but its history intact. Displayed in cabinets of curiosities alongside antique coins and exotic shells, the poison ring shifted from a weapon to a storytelling device, a reminder of an era when beauty and death could be worn on the same hand. The decline of the poison ring also paralleled a change in the nature of personal danger for the elite. As courts became more stable and diplomacy more formalized, the greatest threats often came not from the guest across the table, but from political upheavals, wars, and popular revolts. Assassination still existed, but it was more often the act of a lone fanatic with a blade or pistol than a rival slipping venom into a cup. The theater of poisoning, with its blend of secrecy, intimacy, and delayed consequence, no longer fit the tempo of political violence in the age of standing armies and expanding empires. By the end of the 18th century, the poison ring had largely retreated into legend. A few examples remained in use among spies and agents in the shadow wars between European powers, particularly during the Napoleonic era, but these were exceptions. For most, the poison ring existed in the same imaginative realm as the concealed dagger or the hollow book, a symbol of cunning rather than a common tool. Yet its story was not entirely over. In the centuries to follow, the poison ring would find new life in literature, theater, and later cinema. Romanticized as the ultimate emblem of treachery, it became a staple of melodrama and historical fiction. Authors draped it in mystery, often exaggerating its capabilities and weaving it into tales of doomed love, secret vengeance, and political betrayal. In the public imagination, it retained the glamour and danger it had lost in reality. The decline of the poison ring, then, was not so much an extinction as a metamorphosis. From feared instrument to cherished relic, From deadly reality to artistic inspiration, it adapted to the times in its own way. Its physical presence in the courts faded, but its symbolic power endured, a testament to the enduring human fascination with beauty that conceals danger. In the quiet drawers of museums and the velvet cases of private collections, these rings still rest, their hinges tight, their compartments empty. They are no longer the tools of assassins, but their existence still whispers of a world where a single twist of the hand could change the fate of nations. That whisper is the echo of their age. And perhaps, in certain corners of the human heart, the temptation to craft such beauty with such deadly intent has never entirely disappeared. The poison ring is gone from the hand, but not from the imagination. In truth, its history was never merely about goldsmiths' ingenuity or assassins' cunning. It was about the fragile line between beauty and danger, between what we display and what we hide. The Renaissance was an age that celebrated both, a world that saw no contradiction in commissioning a jewel that could be an heirloom and a weapon at the same time. To study the poison ring is to confront the Renaissance in miniature. The meticulous craft, the marriage of art and science, the hunger for elegance intertwined with the willingness to exploit mortality itself for advantage. It reminds us that for all the age's genius in painting and architecture, it was also an era of whispered betrayals, where trust was rare and power was measured in both alliances and the means to end them. The ring's disappearance from daily life did not strip it of meaning. Instead, it became a mirror for our ongoing fascination with hidden danger. Literature seized on it as a symbol, not because audiences still feared its use, but because they recognized in it a truth about human nature, that we are drawn to what is beautiful even when it can harm us. A glittering ring that could kill was not merely a plot device, it was a parable. The object itself teaches a subtler lesson. The poison ring's power did not lie in brute force, but in invisibility. Its deadliness was proportional to the wearer's ability to be trusted, to sit across from another person without arousing suspicion. In this sense, it was not only a weapon but a test of character, not of the victim's, but of the assassin's capacity to hide intent behind grace. That capacity, history suggests, is not bound to any one century. Today, surviving poison rings rest in museum cases, lit by spotlights that glint off bezels and filigree. Visitors peer at them with curiosity, imagining the hands they once adorned and the tables where they might have lingered. Yet these artifacts do more than recall the past. They invite reflection on the present. We live in a world where weapons are often invisible, in code, in chemicals, in hidden systems of control. The poison ring may seem quaint by comparison, but its principle endures. The most dangerous tools are those no one notices until they are used. In the end, the poison ring is a relic not of evil alone, but of the human capacity to intertwine beauty and harm so seamlessly that they become inseparable. It stands as a warning and a fascination, an emblem of the moments in history when artistry served not the soul, but ambition's darker currents. And perhaps that is why we remember it so vividly, because it forces us to admit that the hand that wears beauty can also deliver death. We will not return to the courts of the Renaissance, nor dine at tables where a single twist of a jewel could decide a life. But we still live among hidden dangers, many of them dressed in elegance. The poison ring lingers in our stories to remind us of the oldest truth in human affairs, that trust is the most valuable currency we possess, and the most perilous to lose.